Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and welcome to part 5 of What If Yuki Trained Yuji, where most of the culling games did end up going normal until we got to the battle of Yuki and Kenjaku, where in this battle they ended up performing significantly better thanks to the help of Todo as well as the other brothers and Mimiko and Naniko. And while they did manage to perform better than they did in canon, with no casualties, Tengen still ended up being captured by Kenjaku, and Kenjaku was able to escape using a swarm of curses to cover himself. As we now return back to our main protagonist Yuji, currently with Nobara, Hana, as well as Megumi. All seemed to be going well, they got all of the points necessary for their plan. However, as they met Tsumiki, Yuji was able to notice something quite odd. He was able to notice that Tsumiki's soul was rather strong, and while under a normal circumstance Yuji might have been able to tell the difference between Yorozu and Tsumiki's soul, right now he couldn't. This was because of the fact that Yuji was not at all familiar with Tsumiki's soul. As a result of that, he just assumed that Tsumiki ended up becoming a strong sorcerer, similar to how Higuruma was a strong sorcerer with high amounts of potential. However, this was something that he told Megumi about the fact that Tsumiki was capable of now using Jujutsu sorcery. And while this did make Megumi a bit suspicious, he just assumed this was part of the culling games itself. Under a normal circumstance, he would have been more suspicious, but he was just happy to have his sister back. However, when Megumi gave the points to Tsumiki for them to leave the culling games, this was when disaster struck, as she instead made a new rule to allow free passage between the barriers for culling games players. As she revealed herself as Yorozu, all of them preparing in order to battle against her and try and find some way to reverse this, but they were not fast enough, as Yorozu was able to escape, and before they could chase after her, they all heard a voice say "in chain." As Sukuna took advantage of Yuji's new massive amounts of speed, moving behind both Nobara and Hana, knocking the both of them out, and before Megumi could even begin to make the ritual to summon Maharaga, he took control of Megumi's body. And once Yuji began to wake back up after Sukuna had transferred vessels, Sukuna landed a punch on Yuji's gut, sending him flying through several buildings. Sukuna believed this was going to be enough power to take Yuji down in a single hit, even accounting for the unlocked power that he had gained access to thanks to Yuki's research. Yuji is just barely left alive. After all, Yuki wasn't able to pull out all of the power that was sealed away, only a pretty good chunk of it, and because of that just barely managed to save his life once Sukuna left his body, and that also managed to make Sukuna think that Yuji was actually dead. However, in reality, Yuji was just knocked out. Which I can see either one of two things happening, but they both lead to the same result, which is either Sukuna just chooses to leave now using Nue to leave, or Maki ends up battling against Sukuna in a 1v1 battle, and then he chooses to leave after Urame shows up, similar to what happened in canon. Now, the reason why Yuji didn't intervene in this battle is because Sukuna decided to use a lot more power than he did originally, because he is aware of the fact that Yuji unlocked his strength, which means by extension he's not going to be too surprised by it. The only thing that he is going to be surprised about is the fact that Yuji did have more of it to unlock, since Yuki could only unlock a portion of it. However, this does lead into something else rather interesting, which is the fact that Sukuna now thinks that Yuji is dead. This does end up with everybody returning back to Jujutsu High Headquarters, with of course Yorozu dying as well as Gojo being unsealed and the bath process all happening the exact same. However, it's now when we hop into the 1 month time skip where things are going to be extremely different because of the fact that we have additional people here that were not here previously. Those people of course being Yuki, Eso, Kechizu, as well as Mimiko and Naniko. Furthermore, Yuji is going to come up with the soul punches a lot faster, like a lot faster. Keep in mind he is significantly better at striking the soul than he is even in canon. And he already knows the soul research book from front to back, and most of all, and this is going to be the most important thing here, Yuki Tsukumo, the creator of the book, is also there to help them create it. However, something else significant does end up happening as well, which is the fact that it's not just Yuji who knows how to do these punches, but also Yuki. After all, the two of them have been doing soul research together for several months now. If anyone was going to figure out how to do it on their own, it was going to be Yuki themselves. Of course, Yuki is not going to be anywhere near as good at Yuji at doing it, since Yuji was doing it subconsciously for a while and just got better at doing it on his own. Yuki would have to learn that entire skill from scratch, but Yuki is actually capable of doing it, just to not the same effect that Yuji is. Furthermore, in this timeline, Yuji does not need to do a soul swap with Kusakabe. This is because during his time training with Yuki, he ended up learning Simple Domain. And Yuji felt he had someone better he could soul swap with, and he could just ask Kusakabe for more tips on how to use Simple Domain better. So the person he instead soul swaps with in this timeline is going to be Kamo Noritoshi. That way instead he's going to be able to get the full mastery of blood manipulation and all those abilities that he can be able to use with his body. After all, he figured that would be better for him to use a soul swap to learn, rather than using Simple Domain, since he already knew Simple Domain and Kusakabe would just be refining it. He'd also be able to ask all 3 of his brothers for advice on how to use blood manipulation better, since they all had rather unique abilities that he wanted to add to his arsenal. And thanks to the head start that he has, Yuji's able to understand all 3 of his brother's abilities a lot better, which is going to help him utilize all of them. Now, he's not as good skill-wise as any of his brothers, but he is still able to use them nonetheless. In particular, he is good with flowing red scale and flowing red scale stack, but that was the most understandable out of all of them. After all, Yuji was a hand-to-hand combatant above all else. However, during the time training, Gojo and Yuki ended up having a separate conversation during this time where Gojo decides to ask Yuki about something that he was curious about for a while, which is if it was at all possible to help Yuji with the process of awakening Shrine and getting him to awaken it earlier than he was supposed to. Now this did end up causing a confused expression to rise on Yuki as she tilted her head in confusion and asked for a bit more of an explanation, and Gojo went in to explain the fact that Sukuna's shrine was already engraved onto Yuji, it's just that he hasn't been able to actually properly use it yet. Yuki would tell him that she would see what she could do, but she is not entirely too certain. Granted, she did also find a way to awaken the dormant power that was in Yuji's body, so it very well could be possible that she might be able to awaken this as well. In this timeline also, Todo ends up picking up the Vibra Slap, but not as a replacement hand, just as an additional tool for him to use. After all, he can tell against someone like Sukuna, his normal Boogie Woogie is not going to cut it, so he is going to need to advance it very hard, and he fought as hard as he could, creating the Vibra Slap as a result of this. Nobara was also training her abilities very heavily up to this point as well. After all, she knew how critical her abilities is going to be, and she needed to sharpen it as much as possible. If she could, she might end up being able to help everybody in a crucial moment by smacking one of the fingers with her hammer. After all, one of the greatest advantages that Nobara's technique has was the fact that she could do it from any range. And as much as she wanted to be on the front line, she knew against someone like Sukuna it would be significantly better if she just stayed behind and was watching, preparing to back up her friends if necessary. Or to just get hits in whenever she could, since she could do it from any range. Mimiko and Naniko, because of their curse techniques, were also going to have very similar support roles, with Naniko having a very similar role to what she had in their battle against Kenjaku, and her very heavily training to make sure it wouldn't be as physically draining as it would be normally, which was to make sure that Sukuna would not be able to use his domain expansion. Meanwhile, Mimiko was preparing to give the sorcerers more mobility through her curse technique. Finally, everybody else was training as well, and each of them were able to achieve new heights that they were not capable of before. Eso and Kechizu in particular were upping their skills thanks to the help of Kamo Noritoshi teaching them and guiding them, which was pretty funny considering the person who had that same name was the one who ended up ruining their lives, but now they had found another person who had that name that was going to be their teacher. Yuki also knows that she is going to have to somewhat hold back when they enter into this battle. After all, their goal is not to kill Megumi, their goal is to save him from Sukuna, so she's going to have to hold back her power a little bit. Granted, there was also a pretty good chance that Sukuna would be able to heal from most of her strikes, so she wasn't too worried about it, she just would have to avoid hitting the head. However, Jujutsu High was not the only team that had advantages right now they didn't have originally. Sukuna and Kenjaku also now had some advantages. After all, while they were not aware of the fact that Yuji was still alive, they were aware of the fact that Yuki, Todo, and Nobara were alive, with Kenjaku adding Yuki to the list of the heavy hitters that Sukuna would have to be very careful of. However, out of this list of people, the person that Sukuna was actually the most worried about was Nobara, mainly because of Nobara's curse technique, which would be able to hit him from any location and do damage to him. Now, while he was pretty certain that he would be able to heal off any damage that Nobara did, that would be able to trip him up pretty heavily, mainly because that damage could be done from any point. But he knew the damage would probably not be as bad as he was thinking, but either way, he was still one to prepare nonetheless. However, there were still some other unpredictable things that even Sukuna and Kenjaku couldn't predict, which was the fact that they were probably going to get Miguel and Leroux on their side, if not a bit faster than they did in canon, because Mimiko and Naniko are also there to help convince them. Though I still see Miguel making the deal to only show up after Yuta was defeated. While everybody was preparing, Nanami ended up approaching Ino as well, and he gave him his approval. He told him that Ino was on the path to surpassing him, if not he already did surpass him, and that Ino was more than worthy of being a grade 1 sorcerer, which Ino was really happy to have that approval. And now, the same day where the talk happens about Yuta taking over Gojo's body, Yuki asks Yuji a familiar question, if the two of them could have a sparring session. Over the several months that the two have known each other, they have been able to bond with each other quite well, but they bonded best when the two of them fought each other. And right now, Yuki and Yuji had improved so much, but Yuji has become a completely different beast in comparison to what he was when they started training. So Yuki wanted to see how far Yuji has progressed, and she also told Yuji to hold nothing back. Todo, Choso, Eso, and Kechizu were all going to be here watching as well, cheering people on. Of course, Todo was going to be cheering on both of them, but Todo, Eso, and Kechizu were obviously going to be cheering on Yuji. Nobara was also here, and being the contrarian type of person that she was, she decided that she was going to cheer on Yuki. Nanami was also here in person, and he wasn't going to cheer on either of them, mainly because he found cheering for them as rather childish if he was being honest. And finally, Gojo was also here, and if you thought Choso and Eso and Kenjizu were being extra with how they were cheering, Gojo had 2 flags for Yuji that he was waving around in the air, which all of them had to question for a moment of when he had the time to make those flags. This ended up with a soft laugh coming from Yuki before she decided to start the charge by punching the ground, cracking it and sending several parts of the ground and rubble towards Yuji's body. As Yuji saw the rubble coming towards him, he instead decided to meet it head on by punching several parts of the rubble and rushing at Yuki. Yuki saw this rush and she met it head on as the 2 of them clashed fists. Now Yuki did have to hold back her curse technique a lot, mainly because of how lethal it was in hand-to-hand combat, but at the same time she knew that she didn't have to hold it back as much in comparison to others thanks to Yuji's immense physical strength. And she was rather impressed. After all, a month ago this level of power would have sent Yuji flying. But now Yuji was only pushed back a bit, as she saw markings form on Yuji's eyes and he activated Flowing Red Scale as well as Flowing Red Scale Stack. As Yuji now went for the offense, beginning a flurry of blows on Yuki, Yuki was blocking them, but she was blocking them with some difficulty. However, the entire time she had a smile on her face. After all, Yuki was able to see how much Yuji had improved, though she could tell he still had a bit more to go, as Yuki then redirected his fist and punched him in the gut at the same time, sending him flying backwards. But while Yuji was sent flying, he ended up clapping his hands together and firing out a piercing blood right at Yuki, which Yuki was able to slide underneath before rushing at him again. And in order to catch Yuki off guard, a moment before Yuki could reach him, Yuji created a blood platform underneath his feet, using it to launch himself above her and then land a punch on Yuki's back. As Yuki then turned around, raising up her guard once more, and the 2 of them were preparing to enter into their next clash. As Nobara was noticing the 2 of them's skills, in terms of skill, Yuki was actually still a better hand-to-hand combatant, but the difference between Yuki and Yuji was not that far. Yuji had improved massively in hand-to-hand skill, and the 2 of them had an almost symbiotic relationship with how they were able to fight alongside each other as well as against each other. And while Yuki did have the physical power advantage, she was still slower than Yuji, where Yuji also had the range advantage as well. However, Yuji wasn't going to spam range attacks against Yuki, which would normally be good to use against an opponent like her, but Yuji was still ultimately a hand-to-hand combatant first and foremost, especially against someone like Yuki, who he felt he needed to be. After all, that was the skill the both of them rivaled each other in. Plus, this was also a friendly sparring match, so he wasn't going to be as tactical as he needed to be. As Yuki and Yuji slowly lifted up their guards, getting closer and closer down to the point where their wrists were about to touch and clash, as Yuji used one hand to push her guard away while using the other hand to palm strike her in the gut. During the time that Yuki was being sent back, Yuji went on the offense, as he went in for another punch. However, this was when he caught her off guard by sending his arm forward with his blood, using his blood to propel it forward and punch her in the cheek. This did cause a smile to rise on Yuki's face, as she had to admit she was impressed at the fact that Yuji was actually able to catch her off guard like that, and everybody else was able to notice that Yuji had landed his first hit on Yuki. However, Yuji wasn't done yet, as his arm flew back while he rushed in, about to go in for another punch, but Yuki ended up grabbing his hand before he could land the fist, and kneeing Yuji straight in the chin, before aiming a punch at Yuji's chest that Yuji was just barely able to block on time with both of his arms that sent him into the ground. Yuki then ended up moving back a little bit, giving Yuji some time to properly get up, though she did also congratulate Yuji for actually being able to land a hit and catching her off guard like that. As Yuji got up with a new determination in his eyes, he had a plan now, as blood armor began to form around both of his hands. Choso remembered this as one of his tactics, and normally this would be a risk to their health, but Yuji was able to use reverse curse technique and deal with that risk, so it wouldn't be as bad, but he was curious to see what type of plan that Yuji had now. And this time Yuki took the offense, going for a flurry of blows on Yuji's body right off the bat, which Yuji was pulling off, deflecting each of them. It was actually pretty easy for him to be on the defense against Yuki. However, when he went for the offense, that was when Yuki could take advantages. However, Choso was able to notice something rather fast, which was the fact that Yuji was focusing Flowing Red Scale Stack to his eyes in particular. He was enhancing his reaction time. Yuji was using Flowing Red Scale Stack to observe Yuki's stance a bit more in order to find openings better than he could normally. As a soft smirk rose onto Yuji, when Yuki was attempting to go for one of the punches, suddenly there was an explosion of blood, one that Yuji had used to blind Yuki. As Yuji took advantage of this chance, beginning the offense, going first for a punch on Yuki's side, before he began his barrage of punches. However, Yuji was very intentionally using the Divergent Fist. This way it would be harder to track his movements because of his cursed energy being delayed. Using the Divergent Fist in order to make Yuki's sensory of Yuji's cursed energy delayed by a couple of seconds. It wasn't much, but it was going to help Yuji a bit when it came to defending against Yuki. After all, he knew most sorcerers use curse energy to sense their opponent's movements, and with Yuji's delayed curse energy, he could take advantage of that when Yuki was blinded. However, it didn't take Yuki long at all to figure out Yuji's tactics, and she was about to land a strike on Yuji's chin until all the divergent fists activated and the curse energy finally hit Yuki. And Yuji took advantage of this chance, using it to sweep Yuki by the leg and push her into the ground. And once Yuki landed, she couldn't help but smile a bit. She was certainly impressed. After all, Yuji in hand-to-hand had done incredibly well. He had managed to make blood manipulation his own and create his own style that only Yuji could pull off with the mixture of the divergent fists, blood manipulation, and his hand-to-hand skill. As she gave the victory to Yuji, while Yuji stuck out his hand helping Yuki up. The two of them most certainly felt ready for their battle against Sukuna, and everybody else felt ready as well. Gojo was also watching this as he was very happy to see that the next generation of students were all rising and becoming much stronger, a whole generation of strong students. Now all they had to do was defeat Sukuna from here. And the Shinjuku Showdown then begins, with the battle between Gojo and Sukuna happening the exact same. Even with more people there, it's not really going to affect the battle, mainly because Gojo doesn't want outside help with the battle. The same can also be said with the battle between Takuba and Kenjaku, as well as Yuta killing Kenjaku, and finally Kashimo versus Sukuna also all ends up going the exact same. But things begin to change when Yuji and Higuruma arrive to the battlefield, which is where we're going to end off this episode of What If Yuki Trained Yuji, where the next episode will be the finale of this series of What If Yuki Trained Yuji, the Shinjuku Showdown, and the final battle against Sukuna. So tell me what you guys thought about this episode and this part in the comment section down below. I hope you all have a good day. I'm gonna see y'all later. Peace out.